Hello and welcome to Steps to Investing. Here's what's coming up in the show. We're really privileged to be joined in the studio by Iona Bain.
And I see my role as to provide information and solidarity because it's a difficult situation out there for my generation right now. And I think millennials particularly need empathy and they need practical support.
Hello and welcome to Steps to Investing on YouTube. Thank you for joining us and thank you for your comments and questions. Keep those coming. We'd really love to hear from you in terms of what topics you'd like us to cover in future shows. Well, today we're going to be talking about investing for different lifestyles, and we're really privileged to be joined in the studio by Iona Bain. Iona started the blog Young Money, is a prolific writer and broadcaster, and is really interested in helping young people deal with the challenges they face when it comes to finances and money. Iona, welcome to the programme.
Hi there.
Thanks for joining us. Hope that was a fair introduction.
Absolutely.
Great. Could you just tell us a little bit about what you do and how you've come to be where you are, perhaps?
Well, I started the Young Money blog 8 years ago, and I started it to learn more about money, but I found that I was also helping other young people. And I see my role as to provide information and solidarity because it's a difficult situation out there for my generation right now. And I think millennials particularly need empathy and they need practical support. So that's what I try to provide through my blog, and I also do lots of writing, broadcast media and a bit of consultancy outside it too.
Sounds like a busy lifestyle. I'm sure we'll come on to talk about how that works in a second. You do write on a lot of stuff there, whether it's Bitcoin, whether it's pensions, whether it's cheap concert tickets. I saw the post the other day. I mean, it's a wide variety of stuff, and I suspect that's indicative of what you're hearing from your audience, is there's lots of topics that people want help and advice on.
Yes. You should write about what you know. So I talk to young people and find out what they're worried about, and a lot of the same issues come up. It's about what their priorities ought to be. We're very, very confused about whether we should be saving for our first home, whether we should be enjoying the moment and living in the present. We don't know how much we should be putting into a pension. We're getting lots of conflicting reports around whether our workplace pensions are going to be enough to fund our retirement. And we instinctively know we should be saving and investing, but I think a lot of young people just don't know how to start that process. So I have tried to address that knowledge gap through my work, and hopefully we're starting to get a greater awareness of the need to save and particularly to invest at this time.
So the world's been a changing place. It always is. The last 40 years though has seen loads of change when it comes to the workplace and how then people use their income to fund a future retirement. Back in the day, final salary pension schemes, a thing of the past. Back in the day, 9 to 5 in a fixed environment. That's all changing for young people, right?
I think so. We don't have that paternalistic culture anymore. We can't rely on defined benefit pensions to come good for us at a certain retirement age. And with that will come the need for individuals to take much more responsibility, rightly or wrongly. I do have a lot of issues with the world that we're moving to. I don't necessarily think it's fair that young people are having to fund more of their futures from their own pay packets, which are very constrained. But nonetheless, that is the reality that we face. And I think it's better to have a constructive approach and say, well, okay, what can I do to make my situation better? So if I can't rely on my workplace pension, what provisions do I need to make outside it? If I am self-employed, what can I do to ensure that at some point I can put my feet up and relax? I might not know when that date will come, but I want to keep that option open. So that's what we have to see pensions, investments and savings as part of a bigger picture of helping my generation feel more secure in the long term.
And that flexibility that you've sort of talked about that comes from being self-employed is a rising trend that obviously brings challenges and opportunities.
Absolutely. So when you are working flexibly, then you may also have a very flexible income. It can vary from month to month. So you can't commit to financial products that require you to make a fixed payment every month or every year. And that's one of the biggest challenges for self-employed or flexible workers. I think you have to find a savings or investment product that will allow for you to make different contributions depending on how much you're earning every month. But at the same time, if you are self-employed, you are used to taking risks, and you are used to taking control of your life. And therefore, if you can get your head around the concepts of investing and find an approach that works for you, then I think that you're going to make quite a good investor if you're self-employed. You'll understand that risk is part and parcel of the working world now.
But more people are starting off self-employed than perhaps coming to it later in life, which must mean that they're having to think about it earlier, and there must be things on the menu, as it were, before investing that you need to get your head around if you're starting out.
Yes, it takes a long time to establish yourself as a freelancer. I mean, I'm still establishing myself. You will have a real insecurity about your income for quite a long time, and I don't think it'll ever really fully leave you, that insecurity. So my advice to freelancers who are starting out is to establish yourself, make sure you've got a number of clients who will pay you a fixed amount so you can have some security and certainty, and be your own accountant. Make sure you are totally on top of what's coming in and going out, that you are totally on top of your invoices, you're filing them and you are chasing them if need be. And then once you are in a more secure place, you then start to save so that you can smooth over your cash flow for when things get somewhat fallow and you need a little bit of extra money. And then you can start to think about investing, but only what you can afford.
That's a good point, and there's a difference, isn't there, between savings and investing, not only in terms of risk, I suppose, but also really in terms of time horizon and access. Savings can be accessed pretty quickly sometimes, whereas investing tends to be a longer term.
Yes, and I think that's why a lot of younger people are put off investing, because it requires you a lot of the time to think about the future, and young people are very confused about what the future holds. They're not sure where they'll be in another 5, 10, 15 years' time. They're not sure where they'll be after the weekend a lot of the time. So when that's the case, we have to move the narrative away from goal setting towards keeping your options open, because I think that's a much more appealing concept for younger people. I know a lot of my friends don't want to commit to putting money into the stock market or into a pension when they think that money's going to be locked up for years on end and they can't access it. So we have to try and obviously make sure that we have accessible savings so that if anything does go wrong, we can get at the money. But then also educate young people around the need to have investments regardless of what your future holds and regardless of what your long-term goals are. Yes, it helps to have goals, but it's not essential. So long as you are investing something and you are staying in the stock market and you're not being too paranoid about what's going on out there and you are holding your nerve, that's what counts.
I wanted to ask you about that because you invest for yourself, and there is a lot of noise in the world, whether it's Brexit or Trump or just economies generally. How do you hold your nerve, and does it keep you awake at night when you invest?
I have learned to compartmentalise and to ignore a lot of the headlines because there's nothing new under the sun when it comes to investing. And if you're going to be in the stock market for the long term, you are bound to see a fall in markets at some point. It's going to happen. And I think that we're all waiting for that fall to happen. We just don't know when. It's impossible to predict the future. And it's pretty futile to be looking at predictions from even the most esteemed experts, because obviously economists and stock market pickers, they've all made their mistakes and they've all got things wrong, which is quite reassuring in a way. It shows that
we're all human.
Exactly, and therefore you can't afford to be too perfectionist, and you can't afford to think, well, if only I had bought in at this time and if only I'd picked those investments, I'd be doing so much better now. If you try to rid yourself of that thinking, then you will make your peace with what you've chosen and accept that it's got to be for the long term. So obviously 5+ years, that's the time horizon where you are going to stand the greatest chance of making a return and beating what you would earn on savings.
And I suppose that's one of the benefits of being a younger investor, is that you actually have got time on your side.
True, and that's what I try to say to young people. You are in a really good position to start, and even if it's only a small amount, if you can put that into the market and let it work its magic in the long term, then you'll end up not really noticing that money is leaving your account each month. And if you can just ignore what's going on out there, because ultimately your investments are not necessarily going to be dependent on a crash happening tomorrow, because you're not going to be getting your money out tomorrow, hopefully.
So you're saying you've got to accept that there is risk,
yes.
and just understand that risk means that you are going to see volatility, technical term, but the value of your investments is going to go up and down.
Yes.
Knowing that you've got that time horizon on your side.
Yes, and also if you're well diversified. So obviously if you have really, hitched your wagon to one particular investment idea or theme, then you are going to be exposed to lots more volatility, and there is a greater risk that when you do want that money for a particular goal, then you might not find that the funds are there for you. But if you have diversified your portfolio, you stand a greater chance of evening out those losses overall.
And do you think those things that we've just talked about are more acute if you are a freelancer or flexible worker, is that you've got to think more carefully about risk and time horizon, or is that just something you don't need to worry about so much?
I don't necessarily think that freelancers have to have a different approach to risk than somebody who's in full-time employment. I think it is more about age and time horizon, and I think it's all about having the basics sorted out.
Covered.
Absolutely. So if you do have short-term savings, and if you have got a secure income, then you can afford to take risk. It just depends on your own preferences. You can't ever dictate to people what their risk ought to be. You can only provide a general guideline and say, if you can stay invested for longer, and if you can, then taking more risk is obviously advisable. But at the same time, the principles apply. You've got to be diversified. You've got to ignore a lot of the noise that's out there, and you've got to stay invested for the long term.
Okay, that's great. Well, just before we finish, perhaps if you could summarise what we've been talking about, what would your top kind of 3 tips be for people starting out as freelancers, flexible working? What are the things that you need to think about?
Well, I would say, first of all, establishing yourself as a freelancer takes some time. So don't worry if you're not hitting the ground running straight away, and don't worry if you're not able to invest for a period whilst you're getting yourself set up. So take care of the basics. Then when you do feel like you can invest, you do feel like you have money to put into the stock market, there's so much expertise and information available now. It's so much better than it used to be, thanks to the internet. Some of it is more reliable than others, and you shouldn't take all of it as gospel, obviously, but do your homework. There's so much help out there. You'll be able to find the information that will be most helpful to you. And then relax. Don't be too perfectionist about your investments. It doesn't pay to be too pernickety or worry about whether you could have picked a better investment strategy or what's happening out there in the world. Once you've made your choice, be comfortable with it, stay invested, let the stock market work its magic, and then over the long term, hopefully based on historic track records, you should be able to make a better return than you would on savings, but you've got to hold your nerve.
That's really good advice. Thank you for giving that, and thank you for your time today. It's been really interesting.
You're welcome.
And thank you for watching. That just about wraps up today's programme. Do like and subscribe to the channel to stay informed, and of course you can always head over to steps2investing.com to find out more. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.